party where you get together and catch up with your old friends.
No, Gina. It's about fronting on suckers you went to high school with. You know? Huh? All the people that's put you down, stole your money, stole your girl. Tonight, the tables are turned.
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And today we have an excellent decades-spanning lineup. Amy, what TV trope are we talking about?
We are talking about high school reunions.
Yes, class reunions. There was a lot to choose from with this one. When we took to the web, started scaring up some TV episodes about class reunions, there was no shortage. So what are the ones we picked?
All right. We started out with the Andy Griffith show, going all the way back to the 1960s, 1963, season 3, episode 19, Class Reunion. Moved ahead in time to the 1980s, Married with Children, a double episode, season 3, episodes 17 and 18, Married with Prom Queen, and the sequel. And then we went to Martin, season 2, Really, Gina's Not My Lover. That's season 2, episode 2, and rounded it out with 30 Rock, season 3, episode 5, Reunion.
So this is a great trope, in my opinion. You know, as fun as it is to talk about the babies being born in the elevators and all of that, a class reunion is like an actual thing that really happens sometimes, and it actually has some real significance. I thought this was a very fun set of shows.
Yes, this is something that we've all either avoided or done.
That brings me to my question to you. Have you been to a class reunion?
No.
So based on what you just said, it wasn't that your class just didn't have one. You consciously decided to not go.
Sure. So there was, well, let's see. We've had a bunch. I think we had a 10, a 15, and a 20. As it so happened, the weekends that they chose were either right after I'd been in town, because I don't live in my hometown. So they were either right after I'd been in my hometown, and so I wasn't going to just go back, and the trips didn't line up, or I was living overseas and it just wasn't feasible.
So we're talking about basic logistical issues. This was not a high school rival that you didn't have the courage to face. This was not a lover that you couldn't manage to see again. This was just scheduling issues.
Scheduling issues, but also not trying to make it work. And then I feel also like Facebook and social media has kind of ruined this. There's no, I wonder what they're up to now. Like, I know. So what am I going to do? Go to my class reunion and stand around and be like, so I saw on Facebook you have 3 kids. Oh, I guess you're a teacher.
Facebook gets the conversation started. Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm very fortunate to still be in touch with a lot of my friends from high school. And, having grown up in a suburb of the city, I always have kind of felt like the city has been sort of a magnet that keeps people fairly close by. Not everybody, of course, but I would say between the fact that so many people I went to high school with stayed in the area geographically, and just like you said, social media takes a lot of the mystery out of it. I think our generation and future ones are not going to have the same intrigue and mystery that class reunions held for our ancestors. I did relate to a lot of what went on in some of these episodes, and we'll talk about it as we go, even if they weren't necessarily high school reunion-based experiences that it was tapping into for me. But let's go back in time. Let's start with Andy Griffith.
Andy Griffith, this is February 4th, 1963, class reunion. Andy and Barney are going through Barney's old trunk.
Yeah.
Well, they're moving Barney's old trunk. So the Andy Griffith Show started out as a backdoor pilot on the Danny Thomas Show, and then and it was a vehicle for Andy Griffith, who was this well-liked character actor. He was on Broadway and more of like a serious kind of actor, but still doing character roles. And so then this was a vehicle for him, and he had appeared on the Danny Thomas Show before, and they wrote this for him to spin off into a show.
I find this very interesting because it's only a year or two older than some of the other shows we've watched, right? I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched. It's the same general time period, but it feels like you're watching something from the 1800s. It's like this was Abraham Lincoln's favorite TV show.
Okay, so you've mentioned two things that are in a lot of, like, if you read up on the Andy Griffith Show, number one, they very purposefully made it feel like the 1930s. It's set in Mayberry, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Both of the stars are from, the South-ish, right? Like Don Knotts is from West Virginia, and Andy Griffith, who plays Andy Taylor on the show, the sheriff, he's from North Carolina, Mount Airy, which is,
Yeah, it's your stereotypical small town. It's come to represent that. You talk about Mayberry and Aunt Bee and everything, and it's a shortcut for small town. It's funny. It's the exact opposite impulse as we had in the 90s with Friends and Mad About You and Seinfeld, where everyone was like, we need to see the lives of urban professionals. We need to be with the hip young people in the big city.
The tastemakers.
Yeah. Back then it was like, let us watch TV and go into the lives of these small town folks where everything is simple and, life moves at a leisurely pace. And it's just a very different impulse.
Yeah. Well, and so the other thing that you mentioned was the Lincoln-esque, sort of like this is Lincoln's favorite TV show, right? So when Andy Griffith first started, when the Andy Griffith Show first started, Andy Griffith was playing the sheriff as this very broad kind of local yokel bumpkin-y kind of character. And he realized when he was watching parts of the first season that he was supposed to be the straight man. And so he changed his character completely to what he called and what he described as a more Lincoln-esque type character. And so, yes, it was a decision from the beginning to make it a throwback show, even though it was 1963 in present time when they were doing this show. They were setting it in 1963, but making it feel like the 1930s.
Yes, and that was very much the impression I got. At first, I was like, is this a period piece? No, it's just a laid-back, simple, small-town vibe. And that extends to the sort of structure of the show, because it's basically like a play, the same way when you go to a play and it's like Act 1, a park bench, Act 2, a restaurant. The 3 acts of this show, the 3 10-minute segments are all one scene, one setting. There's no messing around. There's no cutting away. It is Andy and Barney in the garage or wherever they are for the full first third of this show. Yeah. And it's quiet and long and it's nice.
Yeah. And I was noticing similarly that it had just sort of a straight arrow through this show pointing all the way to the end where they were going to, have the reunion and they were going to meet up with this girl that he had liked that he mentioned when they were looking at the yearbook. And then the end was going to be, will they, won't they? But it was, I mean, you could see it was a very straight path. This is when they were, imagining these tropes for the first time ever. They didn't need to do anything different.
No frills. And they also didn't feel the need to service the other characters. There is no Opie whatsoever. There's no Aunt Bee. This is purely a Andy and Barney story. So to outline the story really simply, they're sort of reminiscing at the beginning.
Yeah.
They're talking about these old girlfriends.
Yes, but wait. So if you don't know the Andy Griffith Show, right? Andy Griffith is the sheriff of this town in North Carolina, Mayberry, and Barney Fife, played by Don Knotts, is his deputy. Andy Griffith is a widower. We find out in that original pilot, the backdoor pilot on Danny Thomas show, that his wife had died and he has this young son. And so it's a setup where throughout the series we can get Are we going to find Andy a girlfriend? Are we going to
sure.
find him a wife? So there's lots of room to play there. So you can have like a rotating cast of young, good-looking women.
It's every woman's fantasy, because this is a time where if he was divorced, that would have a certain connotation. Right. So he still has this saintly, as you said, Lincoln-esque presence, but he's single and ready to mingle.
And he's the town's protector, and he's this night, he's a good dad and all this other stuff. And once he figured out the character that he was like the straight man, then the show sort of clicked into place. So let's start from the very beginning, a very good place to start. So we have Andy and Barney in a basement or a garage or something, because the place where Barney lives or keeps his stuff stored, the landlady has said, you need to get this out because I'm moving something else in. So get rid of your trunk. They're lifting this trunk. The bottom falls out. All of the stuff is spread all over the garage or basement floor, and they start going through it.
Slapstick 101. We're going to spend 5 minutes one by one putting everything into the box and then lift the box up and the bottom falls out. Lots of like simple sight gags like that. But yeah, the whole setup is pretty immaterial. All that really ends up mattering is they're reminiscing about their old girlfriends. Barney has not, is it Ramona?
Ramona Wiley.
Yeah. He's like, oh, I bet she never got over me, right? He's just like.
They're looking at their yearbook, which is called The Cutlass, and Andy stops cleaning up the mess from the trunk and goes and turns a chair over in the garage so he can sit on it. It had been upside down, and sits down and starts going through the yearbook. And he was like, oh man, someone that he was related to, his aunt or something, had given them all away, or his grandmother had tossed them out. So he hadn't seen it in years. So he's flipping through. We find out in this episode, so this is 1963, we find out they graduated in 1945, which I thought was a really smart choice, right? Because they would have been too young to deal with the draft and the war. So they would have still been in high school when all of that was going on. And so they didn't have to, by choosing 1945, they didn't have to deal with like, oh, none of the men who were in our graduating class are coming back for this reunion because half of them were killed in the war. So they're going through the yearbook and they see this Ramona Wiley has written something next to her picture that was like love always or something very amorous and affectionate towards Barney. And Andy
takes
asks,
it very seriously. Yeah.
What does he say? She wrote him a note that says, the tears on my pillow bespeak the pain in my heart.
Yeah. And we're going to get a recurring motif in a lot of these episodes of a certain phrase that just keeps coming back, when they think of a certain character. But yeah, Barney's got his old flame that he's thinking about. Andy has an old girlfriend that he's nostalgic about. I also made a note that Barney has a rock that he gives a whole little soliloquy about. He says, it was my daddy's rock. Right. I was wondering, when did grown men stop calling their fathers their daddy when they're talking to other grown men? I feel like that is a specific cultural thing. But he's talking about his daddy's rock. And then, they both have these girlfriends. And so they decide, I was not expecting this to be the case. They initiate the reunion. Yeah. They say, let's have a class reunion. Barney lays it out like, hey, look, we've got a few people in town already. Let's talk to them. It'll spread, in a web-like fashion, and we'll get everyone back together.
Yeah, they enlist another woman who, I guess, I don't know if she works at the police station or if she just is a classmate of theirs. They enlist her, and she off camera sends out all the invitations and then brings to the sheriff's office this list of everybody who's RSVP'd and the ones that they're still waiting on. And so Ramona Wiley has RSVP'd. Sharon Despain, who is Andy Taylor's, the sheriff's lady love that he's hoping to rekindle with, hasn't responded. Yeah. He says earlier on when they're looking at the yearbook that last he heard she was living in Chicago doing some designing, some type of designer in Chicago. But the most recent address that this woman says that she had for her was in Philadelphia. So, she was like, it's okay, Andy. They're really good at forwarding mail now. So she'll get it. She'll get the invitation, because he seemed a little downhearted that she hadn't responded yet. I think, truth be told, when that was the same sort of thing that happened that first reunion that I remember my, high school people through. It was the girl who lived across the street from me growing up, Lindsay, and her husband. They were high school sweethearts. They got together sort of like a couple days after graduation, but we'd all gone to school together all those years, and we were all in theater together. And those two were still living in town, and they decided that they would put a committee together with that group of people that still lived in town. And so I just remember getting the Facebook invite to this thing, and it was all of the people that were like in her group of friends that were still living in town. So that tracks.
Yeah. And I think this is an aspect that is shared by all of these stories. You need the anticipation, right? You need the scene before the reunion where you're establishing what's at stake and, all of the sort of jitters and uncertainty that's going into it. Everyone has an agenda. All these different characters we're going to talk about has something that they're trying to prove or someone that they're hoping to see. In Andy's case, it's pretty simple. He has this old girlfriend. He hopes she's going to come.
Yeah. And I have what you're talking about with the anticipation. I have this sort of theory that class reunions are an awful lot like New Year's Eve, right? Like nothing good ever. It never lives up to the hype. Nothing good really ever happens. You always think it's going to be this and this and this. But that's why most of the show has to be in this anticipation of, because that's where the excitement is. And then you can and the only one that didn't follow that was Married with Children, because they did that double episode. So they spend a good bit of time at the reunion because they got to the reunion in the first episode.
We do get a fair amount of reunion action in this one. So when we get there, there's a lot of humor, a lot of story stuff surrounding whether or not you remember people, right? And
And I was so surprised because in not a single one of these shows was there the name tag table. Nobody put on name tags, where that's like a standard thing at reunions that I would think about is that like in movies, they always have the table with the name tag.
Yeah.
So, but here there were, like you said, in many of the shows, there was that joke of like not remembering who people were. And I'm like, solves the problem when they pick up their name tag as they come in.
Yeah, that's funny. They didn't think of that. So there's a lot of Andy and Barney kind of whispering to each other, figuring out who people are. They decide, we need to just come clean and be honest. And the next guy who comes over that we don't recognize, we're just going to tell him. And they do. And he's like, well, of course you don't recognize me. I'm somebody's husband.
Ramona Wiley's husband.
There you go. So Barney is shocked and, just sort of astonished at the fact that this Ramona Wiley person has not been pining for him for the last 20 years, but is happily married.
Yes. So we find out in that earlier scene that she has RSVP'd as Mrs. So-and-so. So he already knew she was married, which he, indicated his surprise there. And then he was saying, I feel bad for that guy because she's going to show up and be all over me. And that's going to be, I hope he's not the violent type or something.
Yeah, his confidence is not at all shaken by the fact that she's married.
Yes. And then he meets the hubby and, totally normal guy. And then Ramona walks over and he is just standing there in anticipation and she doesn't remember him.
She doesn't remember him. I haven't watched a lot of Andy Griffith, but I can imagine this sort of dynamic was probably pretty common for Barney, right? A lot of chutzpah going in and then kind of falls on his face.
And so he requotes that line, the tears on my pillow bespeak the pain in my heart or whatever. Mm-hmm. And she looks at him like he's a crazy person. And he's like, we were in social studies 1A together. What do you mean? On and on. And her husband just sort of is like, well, we're going to go dance now, and like ushers her away.
They have to walk away awkwardly. Now, eventually, Andy's former girlfriend does show up. And what I wrote was, they start dancing. People watch them like it's the first dance at a wedding reception. It is like silence in this event space. All eyes are on Andy and what's her name?
Sharon Despain.
All eyes are on Andy and Sharon Despain, just doing this little dance in the middle of the room. And it's like flame instantly rekindled.
Yes. Well, so they were voted best couple junior and senior year. So everyone was rooting for them back in the day. And then she went off to live in big cities and be a designer. And he stayed local and ended up marrying someone else that we never met. And so I think the downfall of the best couple 2 years running would be something that would be interesting, to those who were coming to the class reunion. And she gets that entrance though, where the whole party stops when she walks through the door. So it's like they've all been waiting, just like Andy, for this, is this woman going to show up? Is this going to happen? So I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing that has happened in this same time at the punch table was we find out, and maybe we knew in earlier episodes, but for us, you and I, we got to find out that this was a dry county.
Yeah.
Because somebody asks if the punch was spiked, and Andy sort of with a little twinkle in his eye is like, well, if it is, I don't know about it because I'm the sheriff. And I was like, oh, North Carolina, it's a dry county. Interesting.
Yeah, that's, I think for a lot of people, that would be pretty rough in a class reunion situation.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, that would be a deal breaker, I think, for many people these days. Oh, by the way, it's in Macomb, Alabama, or wherever this takes place, and there's no alcohol allowed.
No alcohol. So they're dancing and rekindled immediately, like you said.
Mm-hmm. I wrote this quote down too, unless maybe I heard this wrong because it's an odd thing to say. When Barney is watching them with this sort of starry-eyed look, he says, one of the great natural romances of all time.
Yes. He says that a couple times throughout the episode.
Natural, like because he's not banging a animal? Like, what is it?
Because it springs from just like, there was no, they just instantly care about each other. They,
okay.
You know what I mean?
I thought that was an odd way to phrase it.
I agree. I think it's a little strange, but like, you knew exactly what he meant in that moment. It was like this, there's nothing the only thing keeping these two people apart is their own choices, right? Or are their own choices, because they love each other. I mean, It's so apparent just from the way they interact.
Well, so let's get to, how the story plays out. They do have this instant attraction again. They dance, they go for a little walk on the balcony or whatever. They sit down and start talking and cuddling. They kiss.
Yeah, they're reminiscing. They're doing that thing of, oh, didn't we do this at graduation?
Yeah.
Didn't we do this same thing? And
right.
didn't we go for a little walk? And didn't I say, oh, are you getting cold? And I did that so I could put my arm around you. And then didn't it go something like this? Yeah. And then they kiss. And so they're having this like, remember when. And then they're sitting there happily and they're like, why did this end? Why?
Right. We had a fight, right. But we don't quite remember what it was about. But then we talk for a little longer and it sort of comes out they had very different plans for their lives.
Right. She is, I want to be a big fish in a big pond. I want to live in these places where there's lots of wonder and excitement and something new every day. And I can work and strive and achieve these like huge, great heights. And he's like, yeah, but you can do that here. And she's like, yeah, but that's big fish, small pond. And it's different. I want variety. And he's like, well, okay, but I'm happy here. Like you can, and so they both are sort of saying happiness can be found in both places. And that was where, I think in a modern show, right, this would be where then there would be like an argument or some sort of, like left versus right kind of thing. We would definitely take a political turn. And this didn't go there. It wasn't, that wasn't the way in the time. It was very much just like, okay, well, we care very much about each other, but we're going in two different directions.
Yeah. They're, as much as their rapport is very, pleasant, they're also very forthright and clear that they want different things. And there's this sort of fundamental difference where she says, like, I cannot be happy here. And I don't relate to this idea that you wouldn't want to move past this. And he says also very clearly, I just don't feel that way. I don't have curiosity about what it's like to live somewhere else. I like it here where I am, and I don't relate to your desire to, travel the world. And so it's left in this sort of dangling, like, well, I guess that's why it didn't work out.
Yeah. And why don't let's just enjoy this time and have a nice night together. So what I thought was really interesting about this, right, is that first of all, that conversation, both sides of that conversation happen without any judgment, which very rarely exists in the modern day. Like Jay grew up around in and around New York City, in the suburbs. I grew up in the South. And so there's like, I definitely have lots of people that I know that this is their story. They don't see any reason to leave. They're happy. They have everything they want. Their friends are there. Their family's there. They have, upward mobility. They can have a nice house. They've got all the things. And I was the person like Sharon who was like, no, I want to go here. I want to do this. I want to travel the world. I want to, live overseas. I want to live in New York City. So I have had conversations like this within that same dynamic. And there always ends up being some sort of sneaky kind of judgment. It's strange how much that kind of permeates the conversation. The minute I say, oh, I'm living in Amsterdam, I'm just home for the holidays, or, oh, yeah, no, I live in New York City, I'm just back for this wedding or whatever. Like immediately, I feel like they're worried I'm going to judge them because I'm this person who's gone to big cities and they've stayed there.
Yeah, that's part of it. And I think it's just very hard sometimes to relate to other people's ideas of success. I remember, I was kind of in the same boat when I was younger, and people would tell me that they preferred not living in the city, that they preferred the suburbs to the city. I would basically not believe them. Like I would say like, yeah, keep telling yourself that, because I just didn't, in my mind, the city was where it's at. The suburbs was a more boring, just sort of crappier version of that. And so, yeah, when people said that they preferred that, it just wasn't something I could relate to. I don't really feel that way anymore, but I absolutely understand how those differences can be irreconcilable. And that conflict was really relatable.
Yeah, totally a relatable conflict. And I just really loved the way that it was handled. It was we really care about each other. We're not on the same page, so we won't end up together, but let's just enjoy this time that we have together. And, we're not in the time of casual sex. So it's not like they're going to mess with each other's heads by, going off and having a night together. Or if they did decide to do that,
maybe they're just discreet about it. That's off camera.
It's true. It could happen. But you know what I mean? Whatever it is, they both decided that they're going to enjoy this time and then that's going to be the end of it. And what I thought was also interesting about this is that this is the plot point of every Hallmark movie, right? Like the girl from the big city goes back to her hometown and she rekindles with the guy. And then she's like, oh, I don't need this big job. I'm going to, move back to the hometown. Or they flip it on its head and they're like, oh, just kidding. He's going to give up his, store and come do everything online and live in the big city, which is always the thing that people make fun of Hallmark movies about, is that that's not realistic. Why don't they have these real conversations like these two characters did in 1963?
Right. Andy Griffith show might not be realistic in all ways, but it is kind of realistic that they go their separate ways and live to fight another day and meet some other person and life goes on.
And life goes on.
Okay, let's move on to Married with Children.
Married with Children. This is a 2-episode arc. Married with Prom Queen Part 1 and Married with Prom Queen, the sequel, aired in April 1989. This is season 3, episodes 17 and 18.
Yeah, I was really curious about this one going in. I watched Married with Children as a kid. I think it was on the Fox Sunday nights with Herman's Head for a while. My friends were into it. It had that sort of mean-spirited, raucous attitude, or that's how I remembered it. I was very curious going in, like, what is this going to be? Like, is this going to be so cringy and mean-spirited and, just sort of dated and hard to sit through? What's it going to be like? Were you into Married with Children back in the early 90s, late 80s?
So this was one of the shows that I was not allowed to watch. This was like in Living Color and Herman's Head and The Simpsons, all of those.
All of Fox.
Yes. My parents were like, nope, absolutely not. You're not watching anything that's on there. Interestingly, this is kind of the middle-ish of season 3. And it was a few episodes before this was the episode called Her Cup Runneth Over, where Al Bundy and Peg go bra shopping. That is what the guy who started, or the person who started the all the campaigns against the show, like morality police kind of a thing. It was because of that episode. It was like there was an older man in the bra shop, like wearing a bra and garters, and there was a homosexual who had on a tiara and was like talking, so all of these reasons the moral police were up in arms, and that's what started the campaign against the show. And so season 3, the popularity went through the roof because of that media attention that those controversies were getting. So this is kind of right as the show started picking up viewership and would be being talked about in the kid circles that we ran in when we were in, middle school and stuff in 1989. I was in elementary school, I guess. And so that, that tracks that you had heard about it in this way of like, oh, it's kind of raunchy and naughty. So I want to watch it so we can laugh at the, sex jokes and mean jokes and the stuff with the kids. So this was on the do not watch list. And in years since, when I've gone to watch it, I don't like it.
Yeah, that's not surprising. Like I said, it's not something that I think in the year 2023, a lot of people are necessarily rushing to experience. But I did have a lot of curiosity. I think it's apparent as we get into it, even though it's season 3 already, we still haven't achieved maximum Married with Children audience frenzy, because characters are entering and not getting gigantic earth-shattering ovations and applause and screaming the way they would in the later seasons. But we're still getting reactions, and the episode begins with what will be the sort of running story for the kids. Bud and Kelly are starving because their parents don't bother to feed them. Which, hilarious.
No, see, and it immediately like does that thing in my stomach that's like, that is not funny. Like, this is horrible parenting and these kids are messed up and this is awful. And they make this joke out of it. And then mom comes home, Peg comes home, and she's like, oh, I spent $500 on a dress, so we can't afford food. And oh, by the way, I got myself Burger King on the way home. Sorry, you're going to have to figure something out. Go scrounge in the freezer, which is completely frozen over. And then Bud digs in there and finds his old goldfish that died years and years ago because they didn't feed it. And then for some reason they put it in the freezer. I mean, the whole thing was sad. And at that point I was like, we have 2 episodes of this to watch. And this is the very beginning. And I was like, I need to shake myself out of this, like, I hate this mentality, or I'm going to be miserable for the next 45 minutes while we watch these 2 episodes. So I kind of just said, all right, we're leaning in. We're going to watch Martin next. And I love Martin. So we're going to have some good comedy in a few minutes. And I just kind of leaned in. And when I just let it go, parts of it did get funny. Katie Sagal is an amazing actress. Al Bundy's doing the face pulling thing that we saw Archie Bunker do. So I have a feeling he was trying to do that, definitely leaning into that as like an homage to Carol O'Connor.
He's fun. I like him. I think Al Bundy, we've been talking in some of these 80s shows about how a lot of the leading men went that sort of nebbishy way, and you get the Harry Andersons and the I don't know, you have a lot of these little nebbishy squirrely guys, and then you've still got the sort of tough guy lugheads. Al Bundy is just I think it's a fun performance. I think it's a fun character, to a point. I wrote down one of his quotes that made me laugh. He goes, I rule this house, I pay for it, I rot within its walls, I make the decisions. Like this idea that he just is resigned to hating his life, and it's all he ever talks about is just how miserable he is, in a way that like he almost gets this twinkle in his eye when he comes up with a fun way to say how much he loathes his own existence.
Yes. And okay, so you watched the show obviously much more than I did. Do we ever get like those heartwarming moments when we realize why the two of them are together? Because she is, and this is the thing that sort of drives me crazy about their characters, is that they're both two things, right? Like his whole world was that he was this football star and he was going to go on, and then he ended up hooking up with Peg and she sucked the life out of him, and now he's stuck in this marriage, right? And as a shoe salesman and trying to raise these kids, and he's stuck and he loathes it, and he like, and then she is like, all I want is for you to make more money, be more successful. And he's like, you're the reason I'm not. And she's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, no, that's his narrative. I think the idea is they are all portraits of tackiness and failure and American excess. And so I think Al Bundy is a guy who peaked in high school because he's a guy who peaked in high school. He explains it as, no, I could have gone on to great things if it wasn't for Peg. But I think we're supposed to understand, like, no, he's a schmuck. She's tacky, whatever she is. And they just kind of deserve each other.
Yeah, she's very selfish, right? Like
selfish, shallow. She doesn't want him to be successful for his sake. She wants it for status.
Right.
And
so she can have more money to go buy things.
Right. And so to answer your question of did they ever sort of balance that with the sort of uplifting aspect of their relationship, I feel like the way they would do that is to sort of meet each other at the bottom, where it'd be like an episode might resolve with they found out a way to steal from somebody or something, or some the idea that they're bonding because they're both sort of shitty or superficial or something.
So kind of like the way this ends, where Peg enlists Al to go cause a distraction in the parking lot so she can fix the ballot or, stuff the ballot box or whatever, so she can win Reunion Queen.
Yeah. I think you had that same idea in the early 90s that it would just be funny to have a family of schmucks. And when you do have the moments of love and of connection, it's by way of something that still sort of makes us turn up our noses at them. That's how they connect.
Yeah. So the B plot in this 2-episode arc is the thing that we start with, which is the kids are starving. And so we don't see a lot of them, but we get that plot coming back in when they realize that their parents are at a high school reunion. And what do they have there? Food. So they do research on the 60s so they can show up to this class reunion, to their parents' class reunion that where they ostensibly graduated in the 60s. They show up dressed as hippies.
This is hilarious. I mean, we're jumping to the end on this one, but it is very funny how their solution of how to be inconspicuous at the reunion is to be two teenagers dressed like hippies when everyone else are adults dressed like modern people.
Right.
Like they just make themselves as conspicuous as possible.
But then when they show up, nobody seems to mind. Maybe they just think it's sort of, some actors that they've hired to look like they looked when they were young.
High school reunion is not a maximum security thing. If a kid walks in and, starts eating spaghetti, no one's going to bother him.
So yeah, they're quoting Bob Dylan and all of this, and they look right out of Woodstock.
Yeah, but let's get to the main story of this is, of course, the reunion. And like we said, you need to sort of set the table with what are we anticipating? What are the unresolved rivalries and issues that we've got from high school that we have to face?
Right. So we find out that they are high school sweethearts of a kind, right? Like they sort of lived their high school lives separately. Al was this, swinging football player and was great with the ladies and was going to go on to greatness. And then shortly after graduation, hooked up with Peg. Peg was very similar, I guess, to her daughter in that she was kind of a, easy girl in high school. And she has a rivalry with another girl named Connie Bender. Bring a friend, it won't offend her, was like the joke about her.
And Peggy's maiden name was Wanker, so it was no need to thank her. So they both have their own slut-shaming nicknames.
Yes. And so they have this rivalry. They both want to be reunion queen. And Peg really wants to go to the reunion because she didn't get to go to prom because Al didn't take her to prom because he wanted to have sex instead. So he doesn't want to go because he's made nothing of himself. You know, he's not interested in that. And Peg really wants to go. And then she sort of slowly convinces him. And the thing that gets him in the end is that he remembers that he was this big man on campus. So maybe there'll be people there who want to flirt with him and he can get away from her.
Right.
And that he has a rivalry with this guy, Jack.
Yes. So they both have their own separate rivalries that they're hoping to resolve. Peg has a very specific sort of ruse that she wants Al to go along with in terms of what his current status is. So I wrote down Peg's fantasy life that she wants to brag about to all of her former classmates is that she's married to a garbage man, they have sex 5 times a week, and they don't have any kids. Those are her requests.
That's like her dream life. So clarify something else for me. What is this thing about Al never wanting to have sex, Peg wanting to have sex all the time?
Yeah.
He's always like, oh, she's forcing me into it. And she's like, come on, honey.
That was definitely part of the dynamic. And to be honest, I didn't totally understand it as a kid. I don't totally understand it now. But I think that's just part of the Al Bundy thing is having sex with my wife is like this traumatic experience. And he's always making these little jabs about like, I've been blind since the last time we fooled around or something.
Because she's very attractive.
Yeah, I don't get it. I honestly don't get it. But that is part of their whole deal is that she is horny and he is not.
And so maybe this sort of ties in with the whole, like, you've ruined my life. You've kind of made me impotent kind of a thing. Like I didn't go on to greatness. I got stuck with you. And now I'm just not interested in anything.
That's part of it. I also think it's just maybe this sort of like laziness and detached, quality to him that he's just like, anything that resembles effort, I don't want to do that.
He's clinically depressed.
Yeah.
All right. So they both are like, have this reason now to go to the reunion. They're going to go. Peg goes out and spends even more money on shoes. We get just a quick little appearance from the neighbor characters. And this is before Ted McGinley is on the show.
Yeah, this is Stephen Marcy Darcy. Yeah, I feel like with their scene was where I thought, at least in this initial episode, that was where the mean humor was actually the most on display, I think, because their take on the class reunion is we love going to those because we can laugh at the failures of all of our former classmates. And they do this thing, they talk about someone being a tow truck driver and laugh at that, which is a pretty lucrative job, I would imagine. And it just immediately brought me back to that 90s thing of, oh, the only thing you're going to need to know how to say is, do you want fries with that?
Right.
This idea that the worst thing that could ever happen to you was having a blue collar hourly wage job. And I just have to scratch my head. Like, who do they think is watching this show? Like, it's all college professors and frickin' like captains of industry that are watching Married with Children?
No, I think the point was that you were meant to dislike them.
But anyway, so we've got their motivations, we've got the anticipation, we're all set. We're at the reunion and we meet our rivals.
We meet our rivals. They have more mean humor. We also find out during this little back and forth with Connie that Connie is married to Jack, Al's rival.
Right.
And Jack walks in a very nice suit, acting like he's been all successful, but immediately is like, hey, Al, remember that fight we didn't have because you didn't show up? We're going to have that fight tonight. Like, why would he even care? Except for that they're all like, even this other couple who acts like they're so well off or whatever, they're also posturing. We find out that Peg spent $2,000 on a phone bill to make long distance calls to all of these people who were coming to graduation to beg them for their vote for reunion queen.
Time out. Reunion Queen. Does such a title exist? And
why?
Yeah, that's it. One part question. Does such a title exist? Answer, no. Right? Definitely not. If there's a queen, there's got to be a king.
Well, and they said, when, we already said Peg, she stuffs the ballot box, so she ends up winning. But they say when they put the crown on her, oh, now she's going to go dance with her king. And it's just her husband.
So there's no
whoever you
actual
brought
election for
is
a
the king. Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a bizarre story device, but yeah, there is this election going on for not the prom queen, the reunion queen. And so I guess that provides this very sort of clear objective metric by which Peggy can vanquish Connie.
Right.
But I loved how after we get this long, protracted exchange of insults between Connie and Peggy, when Jack, the husband, shows up, Al and Jack are just immediately like, they look at each other. Al goes, "You're looking good, Jack." Jack goes, "You too, Al." And he says, "You want to go outside?" And that's it. Just immediately, like, it comes to blows.
We're going to fight. This is what we're going to do. One of Peg's other stipulations, in addition to her, "You're a garbage man, we don't have kids, we have sex 5 times a week." One of her other stipulations is you can't go hang out with your other friends, with your old friends, particularly this, what's like Elliot or something, Eli or whatever,
Eli,
who guest star Squiggy from Lenny and Squiggy from Laverne and Shirley.
All right. I thought his freaky demeanor looked familiar.
And he is this kind of friend who just bets Al to do stupid stuff. So it's like, hey, I bet you can't, eat this chip that's covered in all this dirt. And I bet you can't this. And I bet you can't put that nail through the table with your head. And so the reason that Al couldn't make it to the fight originally was that this Eli guy, whatever this guy, Squiggy, had bet him that he couldn't jump over a Mustang doing 50 miles an hour. And apparently, high school Al got close. His toe clipped the driver's head. So I guess it was a convertible Mustang, clipped the driver's head as he leapt over this Mustang, and he ended up getting hurt. And so couldn't get into this fight.
So yeah, that's how we sort of get this reversal, the sort of changing of the tides, where Peggy is kind of coming up short in this middle part where everyone's kind of siding with Connie. But meanwhile, Al has discovered this table of his old friends, and he's like right back in the saddle, and everyone's liking him. And he's like, "I'm really glad we came."
Yeah, he's having a good time, and Peggy is not. It turns out that Connie has called China, and there were 3 or 4 exchange students that had gone to their school. She flew them in order to get their votes. And we have some Asian women in like what looked like traditional kimonos, which aren't necessarily Chinese, they're Japanese. So that was an interesting moment in racial unawareness. The
cultural sensitivity of Married with Children was not thoroughly vetted and researched.
I am saying that, yes. So we had this moment with these women who are the exchange students, and then they go off, and then Peg goes on a campaign. She's going around from table to table trying to make sure that she can shore up the votes, because she realizes she's like 3 votes down or something.
Yeah.
So she goes to another table, and all of the women are like, "Yeah, we're not voting for you. You slept with my boyfriend in high school."
Yeah, so she's sort of spiraling, like her chances of winning this absurd reunion queen title are getting farther and farther away, but Al is living it up. And then our storylines converge because Al and Jack go to have their fight outside. Basically, everyone in the reunion goes with them to watch this fight, but the kids, Bud and Kelly, are there in their, hippie Halloween costumes.
Right.
And Peg asks them, "Can you pick the lock on this ballot box?" And they say, "Sure, that is part of our skill set."
Yes. Well, so we're solidly now in the second episode. I think the end of the first episode was just a freeze frame on Peg's face when she realizes that she is not going to be able to get enough votes. And that's the cliffhanger.
I'm sure everyone was talking about that at the water cooler.
Yeah, totally. But so it was very like anticlimactic. But then in the second episode, that's when Peg goes over. She sort of dejectedly sits at the table with Al and is just kind of bummed out and listening to him living it up with his friends. And she gets an idea that, hey, I can convince Al, like, hey, Al, go have your fight. Because she told him he couldn't, so he wasn't going to do it. But then she was like, you can go have your fight. And he's like, yes. So now he's going to go create this distraction. That's when Peg sees the kids for the first time. And we get this lovely moment where Christina Applegate is good at something.
Yeah, not only is she good at something, we also get the two of them cooperating.
Yes.
Where they go to the ballot box and it's like, you know,
tweezers.
Yeah, exactly. He's asking her for the utensils as though he's like
Graphite.
a doctor doing surgery. They have all the terminology down, like, oh, this is just a 3-ball double tumbler lock. That won't be an issue. And so it's just this really fun break from their usual dynamic.
Okay. Peg goes, have you guys done this before?
Yeah.
And they're like, no.
And so their plan works.
Their plan works. She is able to remove enough of the other ladies' ballots or stuff them or whatever. And then we get the scene where they're going to announce the reunion queen up on stage.
So this is another one of those stories that kind of ends in that way of like, I guess they all deserve each other in a weird way. They're victorious. Al wins his fight. Jack comes back in and falls down on the floor unconscious. And, you know, Al has won everybody's, they don't carry him on their shoulders exactly, but they're all cheering him on. Peggy wins the title, right?
Yep,
and so
she wins and then they dance and he's like, no, Peg, I'm really hurt. No, I think we should go to the hospital. And she's like, you're fine. Oh, and maybe we can get a little frisky tonight. What's that in your pocket? And he's like, that's my rib.
And so I guess we're sort of supposed to take this other couple as basically a mirror image of them, right? Like the other lady is kind of tacky the way that Peg is. The other guy is kind of a big dummy the way that Al is. So there's nothing really to be taken other than like, you know, our team, the Bundys, they went and they won. So we're happy.
And thinking back on maybe, you know, my sort of apathy around making reunions happen, right? Like if this is what's to be expected, if it's all these people that were losers in high school, or I guess they were cool in high school, but now they're losers, like that's just sad. Who wants to go see that?
Yeah. And in terms of the overall sort of ethos of the show, of course, you know, I wasn't totally off base to go into it and think it was going to be kind of mean and unpleasant, but it wasn't as bad as I had remembered. So I guess it's all sort of relative to your expectations.
Yeah, well, and I think same for me. This one seemed rather, or these two seemed rather tame in terms of just the raunchiness. They didn't seem to have as much of the raunchiness that I remember. There was only one joke about Kelly being a prostitute, you know, where I sort of remember any of those episodes that have more to do with the kids. It's all about her, you know, being sexed up and all about Bud like wanting to have sex.
Yeah.
And so because they weren't at the center of this episode, we didn't see a lot of that.
Yeah, that's true. And to her credit, after the show, Christina Applegate made this real sort of decisive move to never play parts like that again. And you see that even in Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, she's like totally different than this character. And you could tell that she was just like, you know, even if I don't have the most amazing career in Hollywood, I'm not going to keep this going. I'm not going to be this bimbo character ever.
Yeah. Samantha Who, one of the greatest sort of short run sitcoms. It's sort of like 13 going on 30. That's the story of Samantha Who. If you haven't watched it, I think it's like 3 seasons or something. Go watch it. I loved that show.
Yeah,
It
Dead
was
to
really-
Me on Netflix is really good.
Yeah.
But okay, so much for Married with Children. Shall we talk Martin?
Martin, season 2, episode 2. Really, Gina is not my lover.
So were you a Martin gal in the 90s?
Yes. I think Living Single and Martin were once the tide turned and my parents allowed Fox viewing in my in my house.
Glorious day.
Yes, this was one of the shows that I got into. I really liked Living Single and I really liked Martin. I loved the In Living Color, like the two snaps in a circle, like the Men on Film where they were doing that. So then when you had, was it Shanae that Martin did, I was such a sucker for that stuff. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about Shanae, but before we get there, I just want to say that I was a Martin guy too. I really liked House Party, the movie. House Party came out in 1990, I think. That's this really fun sort of early 90s hip hop comedy with Kid and Play. And the sort of third and fourth characters in that movie are Martin Lawrence and Tisha Campbell. So I was just sort of familiar with them when they made this show. And yeah, I remember liking it. I feel like for whatever reason, I didn't have that relationship with it where it was always on, over the years. So it got sort of lost in my memory banks a little.
Yeah, I think, well, it probably would have made it to syndication when we were later in high school and not watching as much after school.
True. All right. So you mentioned Shanae. I'm going to say I loved this episode overall. This first scene made me a little nervous.
Yes.
And you also mentioned the Jamie Foxx thing. And that's what immediately occurred to me is like, this was definitely a thing in the early 90s. Black guys doing drag, like not just drag, but these sort of, I'll use the word grotesque, these weird, you look up Jamie Foxx Wanda, the first thing that pops up is this cross-eyed, weird pucker-mouthed face he's doing. Like it's just so bizarre.
Yeah.
And I guess we were a few years away from Medea. Yes. But, there's guys in drag was all over the place. You look at any episode of The State or Kids in the Hall or anything, it knows no racial or ethnic boundaries. But I feel like this was a certain thing, the Jamie Foxx, Martin Lawrence thing.
Which they have, in years since received an awful lot of criticism about, because not only is it problematic on the, they're straight men doing these stereotypes as either gay or, trans, and then also they are putting down Black women. All of these characters have very strong opinions and, they're always, taking their nails off and trying to get in a fight or like, whipping their hair. They always have some insult and it always has something to do with the culture that they're like insulting other people about. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of it didn't age well. I too, when I was like, I had this sort of conflict within me because I remembered my middle school self really thinking that it was very funny and laughing at it. And so I was kind of like, oh man, I hope Shanae is in this episode. I want to see just a little bit of it. And then we started the episode with it. And I was like, oh God, this isn't good.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Talking about the intersectionality of people that this is problematic for, because I'm watching it going like, I honestly don't know exactly who this is offensive to, but I just have that feeling like this is not good.
Yeah.
But thankfully, it is only a little bit of Shanae. And after that first scene is Tisha Campbell, her character Gina, and her friend have a little encounter with Shanae. We get our taste of that. And then after that, we're in the apartment. We get Gina and Martin. And this got me thinking, is this the first show we've talked about that's a couple, right? That's not a family. That's not a workplace. It's not a group of friends. This is a different vibe. This is the Mad About You. This is the, that thing where it's just a man and a woman living together and their issues, and it's a different feel.
Yeah, a couple with no kids,
right.
And then maybe the ancillary characters like Pam and Martin's friends who come in and out. Yeah, I think you might be right, and it was nice. This is season 2, and they have a history of acting together, right? So the timing is wonderful. Tisha Campbell, I could watch her in anything. She is she knows how to do the physical comedy. We get brilliance from her later on and all of like the physical faces and everything and the body that she's doing. She really, like, this is a home run for her. And then this is another example of that, comedian gets his own show kind of thing. So you can tell she is meant to be the straight man to, Martin Lawrence, and he is just yucking it up doing, we see them, Martin is doing push-ups and like counting and doing all this workout stuff and being very, exuberant and energetic. And she, Tisha Campbell Gina comes out from the bedroom with her coffee and is like, it's morning and she's in a robe and he's been up for hours. She's like, what are you doing? And he's like, I gotta get ready for this reunion. It's my reunion. I'm gonna win Man of the Decade. So we have another goal award.
Yes. Same story. Like, Martin has basically the same scenario and the same motivation as Peg. His energy is great. She's great. You're right that she's the straight man, but there is this sort of joy to their dynamic. And, when she gets annoyed with him, it's only sort of momentary and he gets her laughing again. And you're right that later on, we're really going to get to see that she has not at all been saddled with the boring spouse part to play. But yeah, for now, we're getting mostly Martin doing his thing. He has this wild energy. He starts talking about the reunion, and we get the first instance of this recurring thing where he talks about this guy. He starts talking about Ricky Fontaine, and he gets this kind of faraway look in his eye, and he kind of jerks his head to the side, and he says, Pretty Ricky's what they called him. And he just has that, kind of wild, like semi-psychotic energy that I had really forgotten about. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like, you're seeing the influence of the Jim Carrey era of comedy. Everything's a little cranked up, but it's definitely his distinct version of that. And it's fun. Like, he's really funny.
Yeah, I would liken his sort of energy to Kevin Hart. They have that's kind of a similar sort of like very amped up energy, and Martin has this backstory from school where he was not cool. He got fronted on many times and was sort of the butt of jokes, and made fun of. And he knows that he is now successful, right? So he is this, number one DJ in Detroit. He's got this radio show that's super popular, and he's, a celebrity in town, and is going to go back to the reunion and be like, look, I made something of myself, and all those guys who hated on me, I'm going to show them what for. Yes. And Pretty Ricky being one of them. But he makes a list. He has a little reporter's notepad that he's
a memo pad,
like ticking names off.
The payback list.
Right. That and once he gets to the reunion, is like going up and having these exchanges with people where he gets one over on them because of his success, and then also puts them down. And then now he can cross them off the list.
Right. So we get a different dynamic here, because Martin doesn't have to invent fake success. He doesn't have to pretend to be a garbage man that sleeps with his wife 5 times a week. Yeah, he is a relatively successful person. He's supposed to go with Gina, but she can't go.
She can't go. And this is where the premise of this episode gets problematic, right? So they're having their coffee. He's got all this manic energy. He tells her that she needs to go to the dentist to get her teeth whitened because she drinks too much coffee. He tells her that in order for her to be ready to be the Man of the Decade's woman at this reunion, he's like, I have a day of beauty planned for you.
Yeah.
So she's going to go get like a real pedicure and manicure because he messed up her nails last time he did it for her. And she's going to get a facial, and so he's planned a spa day for her, which is very nice. But the way he pitches it is very much like, you've got to look your best so that I can. And she doesn't have, she kind of laughs at, she's just appreciative of the spa day, but it rings in my ear with a little bit of that misogyny that I don't like. And then also knowing that, Tisha Campbell left the show the last season and sued Martin Lawrence for sexual harassment.
That all sucks. But I would say about the storyline, I think it's very much the show is going to show you, that's his foible for making her do that and for thinking that way. And that's what's going to lead to the, comically disastrous results at the end. But so what makes it that she can't go?
So she gets a facial, an avocado mask.
Right.
And she's allergic to avocado. And so she has all of this, like she comes home and has all these sort of red bumps all over her face because she's had an allergic reaction. And while at the dentist was like, oh, hey, while I'm in here, why don't I fill that cavity and hit a nerve with the Novocaine or something. And so she's got this big swollen part of her face and she can't really talk because she's all numb. So she's drooling. So she looks a mess. Like she comes home from her spa day, her face is all, red and blotchy from this allergic reaction. She's got the one side of her face is all puffed up because of where they did this dental work and there's stuff in there now. And she's drooling everywhere. And they gave her some other medicine because of all of that. And so she's loopy. The dentist prescribed some pain meds that she didn't take because she wanted to be able to go to the reunion. And she comes to the door and we see this face. I mean, it's comical, all of this stuff going on. And then Martin Lawrence turns to camera and is like, like, oh, she's such a dog. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
He tries to be nice about it and is like, oh, no, you should go to sleep. You should take those pills and go to sleep. Like, you don't have to go. I'll go by myself. It's okay. And then she goes off and he's like, thank goodness.
So he goes stag to the reunion. And we have a very similar kind of situation as the Married with Children thing, where his payback is basically just insulting people, is dissing.
Right. Like he gets a zinger in on them. And also he like talks about his show being, number one. And then it's
very funny. He's walking around with this sort of hunched posture with his little memo pad. He's going up to somebody going, your mom sucks eggs and crossing their name off the list.
He usually tries to kind of trick them into, sort of ease them into a little bit of a conversation so he can really get a good zinger in.
Yeah.
And those are well done. And then Pretty Ricky arrives.
Right.
And then we have a whole Your Mama back and forth diss scene, which can I just say, like, did you guys do this in middle school? Did you
definitely
get a gang of people together and then trade insults like that?
I don't know. I don't know if I personally was in one of these like schoolyard scenes, but yes, that was a nationwide phenomenon for sure.
Your Mama joke.
Yeah, they would sell books in Barnes and Noble of Your Mama jokes. They would call them snaps.
Of course, that they sold books. For Your Mama. Okay.
Yeah. And this was where it came from, right? These early 90s Black comedians.
Yeah. So he's in the middle of this, Your Mama off with Pretty Ricky, and Pretty Ricky isn't going quietly into the night, right? Like he is going to give as good as Martin and they're going back and forth. And so we find out one of the reasons that he dislikes Pretty Ricky is that Pretty Ricky stole this girl from him. And he had just like finished dissing that girl for leaving him and going with Pretty Ricky. And he turns around and there's Pretty Ricky and off they go. So he sort of round one kind of comes out, Martin kind of comes out on top with my girlfriend's a model and we live together and I've got this great show and also here's a few zingers. Yeah. And then there's a moment where the room is distracted because someone has walked in. And the camera pans over and we see Gina in her sexy red dress with her bra coming out of the top, her makeup smeared all over her face. She's drawn on eyebrows, but she's only done the outline of them. So like we have the center of her eyebrows are empty. Yes. She's put on cat eyes, but they're, like cat eye eyeliner, but it's wonky.
Post lobotomy homeless woman type look.
And she is doing she's got this big smile and these huge eyes. Like her the acting is, she was so good. She has her eyes bugged out of her head. She's got this sort of sideways smile because she still has the dental work, so she can't really talk. And her smile's sideways and her lipstick is sideways to emphasize that. And she's still drooling. And, like I said, her straps are kind of half off and her bra's coming out of the top of her dress. And she's like, Mom, I love you here, and like doing, she can't speak. And they're like, what is that? And Martin's like, oh, fans, they follow me everywhere. Let me handle this.
Yeah. Martin disassociates from her. But yeah, we talked before about how Tisha Campbell didn't get stuck with the boring straight man spouse part. And this ending, I mean, look, I'm not going to say I personally think this was the most hilarious scene in a TV show ever, but that they give her a long time with this and a lot of physical comedy. It's that same lack of vanity that the male comedians get to have, that same crazy goofiness and rolling around and being crazy. And it really sucks to hear that their real life relationship was bad because...
Well, I guess it fell apart towards the end because this is several years before that happened.
Yeah, and whatever it is, watching this, you really get the sense of true collaboration and that they really feel like equals and that she can be just as silly and crazy as him. And you understand why they're together and the whole thing just really works. And you get the story thing of him sort of getting karmic payback for trying to use her as a status symbol and trying to make sure that she's all painted up because she ends up being, this comical absurdity.
Right. She's a mess. She's got one heel that's broken. By the way, she's doing all of this in a dress and heels, right? So like when guys get to do this over the top, whatever, the only thing they really have to worry about is potentially splitting their pants, right? She's doing this and trying not to show her full hoo-ah because she's in a tight skirt and heels. She's got hose on. She's slipping and sliding all over the place. She's falling out of her chair. The face alone, she just bugs her eyes out. It's so funny. And, at first Martin tries to distance himself and then he comes over and is like, oh, we got to get you out of here, and his friends that, we know from other episodes are there and they're helping. And then Pretty Ricky is like, hey, this doesn't look like this is any old fan, and now we get another round of the Your Mamas because Pretty Ricky has realized that this is the so-called model that Martin was talking about. And then Martin does the flip and he's like, you would be lucky to have a woman like this, Yeah.
And so you get the sort of, the moral of the story is, be yourself and don't front, as they used to say, right?
Right.
If you try to pull off this, whether you're pretending to be a garbage man or, you're just trying to make your wife into some sort of idyllic creation, you gotta just be yourself and let the truth speak. All right. You want to move on to 30 Rock?
30 Rock. We are watching season 3, episode 5. This is called Reunion, and this aired December 4th, 2008, a full 4 years after Mean Girls.
Yeah, I was very much a 30 Rock viewer. I liked this show a lot. I remember at the time just thinking she really found this unique combination. It was just so sort of canny to me that she had kind of plucked Tracy Morgan and she found that vibe of Alec Baldwin on his SNL appearances, and that combination, there just wasn't quite anything like that.
Yeah. And the initial treatment of this was Rachel Dratch was going to be Jenna Maroney's character, which I thought that was interesting. And then they, made changes. And then Rachel Dratch ended up being, a guest star several times. But yeah, I made mention of Mean Girls because we get that sort of similar vibe because we're going back to high school. We get a little bit of that vibe in some of the throwback scenes that we see Liz in and when she's talking about her high school days. I also was a fan of 30 Rock. Really, we both love SNL, huge fans of that since we were young. And then, of course, it was great to see, Tina Fey bring this and do exactly what you said with plucking the certain people and making this whole little universe. But the show has kind of taken on a life of its own, I feel like, in the years since, where people who are fans of 30 Rock, they have gone back and rewatched and they can quote things. And so where I'm like, oh yeah, I really liked that show. I watched a lot of it. I want to go to there and that kind of stuff. But I do not have the encyclopedic knowledge of all of the guest characters and funny bits and long running jokes that so many people who love 30 Rock have.
And yeah, I guess I'm in the same boat. What I would say now is that, everything we said about the Andy Griffith show, you see the full opposite here, right? This is very much in the world of urban professionals. We want to see the people behind the scenes at TV shows and stuff. We want to see what their lives are like. We want to see CEOs of big companies and stuff like that. Life in the big city, and also the pace of it. And this was not a surprise. I remembered it being like this, but my God, if we were talking about the Andy Griffith show was 3 acts, so it was 3 scenes, 3 settings. This is like within the first minute, you've been to 20 different places. They're doing those early 2000s cutaways that had been taken from The Simpsons and Family Guy and were in everything. There's A, B, C, D, E, and F story going on all within the same world. It's very fast and dense and a lot going on.
And you can have an entire subplot happening in 5 lines of dialogue done, spread out over 2 different cutaways. And that's it. And that's, you don't have to write deeply. You can write thin. Speaking of writing, this episode won an Emmy for best writing.
Yeah. So the story of this episode is Liz is the one invited to a reunion. She's not inclined to go. But Jack, Alec Baldwin's character, is down in the dumps. There's an ongoing story where he was supposed to be named the CEO, but the retiring CEO decided not to retire.
Rip Torn is the CEO, and he's been in a coma. And so he had told Jack right before he fell into a coma that he was going to be his successor. So he was going to be CEO, and then he falls into a coma having not told anyone else. So we get his daughter, who's not very bright, who's been acting CEO while her father's been indisposed. And at the very beginning of this episode, Rip Torn wakes up and then tells Jack that he's going to stay on. He's had a vision while he was in his coma. He's going to stay on as CEO. So Jack, we get all the elation of him. I'm going to be CEO. Hey, Lemon, you should take the CEO's jet. You should take the private jet to your reunion. You're amazing. Look at all you've done. You're so successful. Go show those yokels everything that you can, because she's from outside of Philadelphia. And then when he finds out he's not going to be CEO, she's like, well, I don't have to go then because I don't have the jet. And he's like, no, I've rented a jet. You're going. I'm going to tag along with you because I'm going to take the jet to Miami because I need to get away.
So that's his plan, to go to Miami. So we have another case where the character on the show is genuinely successful, and they want to go back and flaunt their success.
Or someone else wants them to go back so they can flaunt their success.
And Liz has a certain perspective on herself that she was bullied in high school.
Right. And that's sort of who her character is throughout the series. She's this kind of, she's dumped on, people make fun of her. She's the boss, but she can never really get anything done.
Nerd, so it's like, yeah, I've attained some success as an adult, but I was the kind of kid that you would make fun of when I was a kid.
Right. And unlucky in love, she's ostensibly quite brilliant at what she does. She's running a TV show, but she just, she needs Jack's mentorship. She's not, she's, like you said, a grown-up nerd. She's just not able to kind of get her life together. That's sort of a running gag throughout the series. And so she has this idea of herself that she was that in high school too. She was this nerd, and we get a flashback scene where Liz is like looking into a microscope or a telescope or something in some class, and these was it Kelsey something makes fun of her, and she sort of mutters something under her breath, and that's the end of it. So her story is she was bullied in high school.
Right. So she has a similar motivation as Martin. She's like, I don't think she has a memo pad full of names for a payback list, but yeah, she's like, these people were mean to me. And now, I'm going to at least make them sort of admire and envy me. So there's, like we said, a bunch of other stories happening at the Rockefeller Center.
Yeah, Jack was going to drop her off and go to Miami, but they get snowed in. And so he's got to stay in wherever they are outside of Philadelphia. And then he decides he just can't bear sitting
another dry county, just like Andy Griffith.
That's right. Another dry county. He's like, well, I can't bear staying at this hotel, so I'll go to the reunion because at least there's booze. Yeah. I guess the reunion was the next town over or something. So they were able to have booze. Anyway, so he goes and shows up at the reunion and then gets mistaken for this beloved high
Larry
school character.
Braverman. Yeah. And when Liz Lemon points out you're 12 years older than everyone here, he says, I'm a Hollywood 40 or something.
He says rich 50 is the same as regular people's 38.
Yeah, exactly. So
which is accurate.
Yeah, because he's a suave rich guy, no one's going to notice that he's over a decade older than everyone else. And yeah, there is this great plot line where all these people just latch onto him. And it's like he is everything that Liz isn't. He's just sort of a man of the people, and something about his sort of resignation, not resignation literally from his job, but his sort of like just his feeling so defeated has freed him up to just be this carefree guy that gets along with everybody.
Right. So he has this moment of realization that he doesn't want to be, going back to the Andy Griffith show, he doesn't want to be the big fish in the big pond. He wants to be a regular Joe. And so taking on this character of Larry Braverman feels like he's able to do that. So he's like leaning into it. He's like, I'm a man of the people. This is what it's like. The simple life. This is what it's all about. But we find out, right, within the first few minutes that Liz is at the reunion, she goes up to this Kelsey woman who had said something mean to her, was one of her bullies, ready to have it out and be like, hey, you were mean to me. And it's a total 180.
Yeah. And this was the part of all these shows that I related to the most. We get the device of returning to the flashback, but showing it from a different point of view. And what we discover was that Liz was being a snob to them and making them feel stupid.
Right. Liz was the bully.
Yeah.
She was the one who every time anybody tried to be nice to her, she would hide behind some sort of mean quip or some joke. And what we saw in the original flashback was Liz Lemon mumbling something. In the reverse flashback, when we saw it from this other character's perspective, what she said was, I don't know, Kelsey, how about your mom's pill addiction? And the girl who had just been saying, hey, can I help you with your telescope? Was being nice. And so Liz has this realization that everything that she did in high school, all of that stuff she thought she was like saying under her breath because she was so frustrated and thought everybody was bullying her, was manufactured. And now her sole purpose at this reunion is to make everybody like her, to say, no, I'm not mean. I'm nice. I'm nice. Look.
Yeah. And I would not go so far as to say that I thought I was bullied and I turned out to be the bully. But Liz Lemon says, I didn't think anyone was listening to me. I was a nobody. And I really related to that idea that if you weren't popular or cool in high school, if you were awkward, you didn't think that you could hurt anybody's feelings. And the idea that somebody could be hurt by something that you said or did was just like, what are you talking about? Like, nobody cares what I think or what I said. And there were many cases when I look back on the weird little skits that we made. And one guy, our first summer back from college said that he had a 4.0 grade point average. And I said that like it must have been a clown college or something. And he was like one of the cool, popular guys in high school. And I was just me. So I was like, this, he couldn't possibly have his feelings hurt by me. So the idea that thinking that because you were awkward or unpopular meant that you were always the victim and that you couldn't have ever been the perpetrator, you couldn't have ever done anything wrong, and then sort of having to contend with the fact that maybe you were actually kind of a dick too. That was absolutely something that I connected to.
But that's so interesting. Like, we don't realize, like, we have this sense of self, right? When we're young, and we don't think we can have an impact, or we think we have more of an impact than we do. And we just don't have another sense of self. So anyway, I found that super fascinating in that parallel. And then to go back to the episode, what Liz doesn't realize in her quest to make everybody like her, and it's not until the end that Jack says it to her, is that she hasn't changed. She still does all of those things, right? She still uses humor to deflect. She still says nasty things about people under her breath, and is very judgy of others. And for all of those reasons, she isn't able to be her fullest self. She's unlucky in love. She, yes, is successful in her career, but isn't, respected for all these reasons.
Yeah, she is who she is. It is those things about her that, led her to, like you said, a relatively successful professional life where she did move to the big city and she writes a TV show and all of that. But her problems relating to people are real. And in a sense, we get the same lesson that we did in Martin. You got to be yourself and accept who you are and how your life turned out. And, trying to trick people is just never going to work. And so speaking of that, the Larry Braverman storyline comes to a head when Jack jumps on stage to save Liz Lemon from being carried, right? Because we have another one of these, elected office things where
they're doing superlatives.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they've got her up on stage and she's going to have a bucket dumped on her, like in the movie Carrie, and Jack jumps up and saves her. But then some woman in the audience says, "Hey, Larry Braverman, I need you to meet your son." So he immediately goes, "My name is Jack Donaghy. I'm not Larry Braverman. I have never contacted this woman," and just immediately shuts the whole thing down. And they basically, in a sense, it's like the Married with Children thing, where it's like, yeah, you know what? Screw all these people. We're on the same page. We like each other. Let's get out of here.
And they do. And they run off and she doesn't get blood dumped on her.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do we think? Looking back on it, class reunions in TV sitcoms. Any final thoughts?
So a couple of things. I liked that there was a lot of crossover between the Andy Griffith show and 30 Rock. I think you can see the evolution of that trope from the beginning to the last episode that we watched in terms of the people and the ways that our society has changed and the ways that we look at nostalgia and the ways that we deal with storylines, like all of those things. We went from, like you said, having the very clear 3-act structure, 3 sets and 3 conversations. And that was the episode, to this unwieldy kind of over exaggerated, many things going on,
sensory overload,
and our attention spans, right? So to track that. And then also the way that we had the hometowny folks being sort of the unsung heroes of or not even, or just the center, right, of that episode, the first one. And then in the last episode, it was, we're better than all these people anyway, so let's get the heck out of here. So you got to see it kind of from both perspectives. And then the two in the middle were not, one's Chicago, one's Detroit, but they were more suburban, right? They're more like that. And they have that sort of feeling of that striving to recapture youth, striving to show that you've made something of yourself in the intervening years. And then also realizing that it doesn't, none of that really matters. What really matters is the day to day.
Yeah, I think, like I said at the beginning, the class reunion is a really good trope. And maybe it's unfortunate that, for the reasons we said, social media mostly, we're not really, we don't have this as much in life. Maybe we're not going to have it as much in TV shows, and they need to find a new version of it. But it's just such a natural, organic way to, particularly if you've got characters that you met as adults, to give them, a little bit of backstory and to kind of flesh out, literally where they came from and, to play on all of their little neuroses and anxieties and stuff. It makes a lot of sense for this to be a story. And I think for my money, Martin is the best in terms of just like viewing experience because it does sort of fall in the middle. I was surprised at the extent to which 30 Rock, I still like it, but it is a little bit of an assault on the senses because there are so many jokes. It becomes, like a joke factory where you just get these, you do get a lot of sameness and you just get a lot of everything. Martin, like we talked about, their relationship was a blast. The performances are really fun. And it's sitcom-y in a fun way. He gets a little bit too big for his britches and he gets his comeuppance and, we have a few laughs.
Yeah, well, and each of these has a sort of, maybe not Andy Griffith so much, but the other three have a sort of sense of humor that's set in place and time. And I think because 30 Rock is the sense of humor that is the most recent in terms of sense of place and time, it's the one that I feel like 10 years from now, if we did this same rewatch, I probably would love 30 Rock the most because it would give me that sense of remember when this was the style that we thought was so funny. Yeah. Whereas right now, it being so close to our current sense of humor, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's just another one that's like this. So I think because of the combination of bang up performances and that sense of nostalgia being sort of perfectly placed, that's why Martin hit so well. Like, I mean, I was laughing during the credits and wanted to applaud at the end of that episode. Like, I just thought it was so great. And like you said, with the caveat that like, it's not the greatest episode of TV, but it was really enjoyable in this lineup. And then the other thing is the trope itself, right? Class reunions, all of the ones that we watched sort of did similar things with the striving or the, wanting to be more, wanting to prove themselves and all of that. It seems to me that there are so many different ways that you could go. There are so many different stories to tell at a class reunion. Just look at After Party, that show that is kind of like out now, or the Tiffany Haddish show.
On Apple.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's on Apple. So it's every episode has a bit of the reunion and then a bit of the after party that was after the reunion. And a lot of those tropes are in this, the striving and the wanting to rekindle.
The premise is a murder. So yeah, you've got the rivalries and the resentment.
And so I'm excited to go and look at some of these other episodes. Like you said, we found like 30 episodes of different TV shows throughout history that have done this same thing. And the reason there's a wealth of that is because there's so many storylines you could do. I mean, you could kick off an affair if it was more of a drama, you could end a relationship, you could do so many things with that. And and
it's a real thing that happens in the world. It's
right.
Something that people actually do. It's not some weird contrivance you have to make up. So what are we talking about next week?
Next week, we're talking about This Half Is Mine. All of our episodes have to do with characters dividing the room in half. We're going to start off with I Love Lucy, 1951, Season 1, Episode 8, Men Are Messy. Moving ahead in time to 1966, The Addams Family, Season 2, Episode 17, Morticia and Gomez versus Fester and Grandmama. And then just a few months later, we'll take on The Munsters, Season 2, Episode 29, A House Divided. And we'll round it out with Nickelodeon's Hey Dude, Season 2, Episode 4, Bunkmate Battle.
Yeah, a lot of old-timey stuff, a lot of creepy and kooky characters to contend with there. So yeah, that'll be next time, and until then, we will declare this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The sitcom study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.